BlackBerry? Let's start with the king of keyboards. Back in 2008, BlackBerry wasn't just a brand, it was a status symbol. They were valued at over $80 billion, owning 50% of the US market. Their killer feature wasn't an app, it was the physical QWERTY keyboard and the legendary BBM. But then, 2007 happened. When the iPhone launched, BlackBerry's leadership didn't panic. They laughed. They called it a toy with terrible battery life. They were convinced that real professionals needed physical buttons. Talk about a fatal ego trip. By the time they tried to pivot with the Storm, which was a buggy mess, the world had already moved on. Developers weren't building for BlackBerry anymore. They were building for iOS and Android. The data is brutal. 2009, 50% market share. 2013, less than 3%. 2016, 0.0. BlackBerry didn't just lose the game. They forgot the rules had changed. Nokia wasn't just a brand, it was a monopoly. In 2007, they produced 40% of all phones on the planet. They had the best hardware, the best supply chain, and enough cash to buy almost anyone. But they had a massive blind spot, software. While Apple was building an experience, Nokia was stuck fixing Symbian, an ancient operating system that was never meant for the touch era. They had a better OS ready called MeeGo, but internal politics killed it before it could breathe. Then they made the ultimate Hail Mary pass. They partnered with Microsoft. It was a disaster. The Windows Phone ecosystem was a ghost town. No Instagram, no YouTube, no chance. By 2014, Microsoft bought Nokia's phone business for $7.2 billion. 2 years later, they wrote off the entire thing as a total loss. Nokia didn't die because they made bad phones. They died because they refused to leave the past. HTC is the ultimate what-if story. They built the very first Android phone. They built the first Google Nexus. In 2011, they were actually beating Samsung and Apple in the US market. So, where did it all go wrong? Marketing and a scale. While Samsung was spending billions of dollars to make the Galaxy a household name, HTC was quiet. They released too many phones with confusing names. Wildfire, Desire, Sensation, none of them stood out. Even worse, they lost the supply chain war. When they needed high-end screens, suppliers prioritized Apple and Samsung first. HTC was left with the scraps. By 2017, they sold their best engineers to Google for $1.1 billion. Today, they don't even try to compete with flagships. They pivoted to VR with the Vive, leaving the smartphone world behind, not because their phones were bad, but because they were invisible. Siemens was the German powerhouse of the mobile world. They were the first to launch a color screen, the first to put an MP3 player in a phone. They were high-tech, high-quality, and highly unstable. Their downfall started with the 65 series. A massive software bug caused the phones to shut down when playing loud sounds. It wasn't just annoying, it was a safety hazard. Trust evaporated instantly. On top of that, Siemens tried to be fashionable with the Celebrity line. They looked more like makeup kits than phones, and consumers hated them. By 2005, Siemens was losing nearly 1.5 million euros every single day. They sold the business to BenQ for basically nothing. A year later, BenQ Siemens filed for bankruptcy. It's a brutal reminder, German engineering means nothing if your software can't stay awake. Palm? Long before the iPhone, Palm owned the world of handhelds. In 2009, they launched the Palm Pre with something called WebOS. And honestly, it was brilliant. It had multitasking cards and gesture navigation years before Apple or Google. But Palm committed a strategic. They launched exclusively on a Sprint, the weakest carrier in the US at the time. If you wanted the best phone in the world, you had to switch to a network that barely worked. Combine that with creepy abstract commercials that confused everyone, and the result was predictable. They ran out of cash and sold to HP for $1.2 billion. HP then managed to kill the entire project just 49 days after launching their first tablet. Palm didn't fail because their tech was bad. They failed because they didn't have the money to survive their own innovation. T-Mobile Sidekick. The T-Mobile Sidekick was the original social media phone. With its iconic swivel screen and perfect keyboard, it was the only phone that mattered to celebrities like Paris Hilton. But the Sidekick was built on a lie. It relied entirely on the cloud back when the cloud was still fragile. In October 2009, the servers crashed. Millions of users lost their contacts, their photos, and their calendars forever. Trust was destroyed in a single weekend. Microsoft, who owned the company behind the Sidekick, tried to fix it with the Microsoft Kin. It was a disaster so big, it was canceled in just 2 months. The Sidekick era ended because it couldn't survive the App Store revolution. T-Mobile realized they were better off selling iPhones than trying to build their own hardware. The Sidekick didn't just go out of style, it went out of sync.